Hi everyone, this is Libby, and today we are going to take a look at Acts chapter 11 and 12. I titled it Ignited. His flame burns on. His light has ignited the world and can never be extinguished. We read in Romans 8:37, "But in all this we are more than overcomers through him who loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor messengers, nor principalities, nor powers, neither the present nor the future, nor height nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of Elohim, which is in Messiah, Yahusha, our Master."
I served the Roman Empire. I fought wars against those who did not believe in our gods. But nothing could prepare me for the truth that is now risen.
He was very special.
They're fanatics.
What was his name? He was called Yeshua.
The man's dead. His followers are in hiding.
He's been a threat.
Take control out there and finish things.
The tomb is sealed, guarded with your life.
If this body vanishes,
We have a potential Messiah.
where has he gone? You tell me.
You will track down the corpse of Yeshua.
What happened to the Nazarene?
He's right here. Open your heart and see.
I don't know what to believe anymore.
Now, last week we studied and saw how Yahweh gave us some amazing insights. We would be amiss not to review and relish these amazing connections as we listen to Peter recount the occurrence in Caesarea at the home of Cornelius, the centurion. We read in Acts 11, "And the apostles or emissaries and brothers who were in Judah heard that the Gentiles also received the word of Elohim. And when Peter went up to Jerusalem, those of the circumcision were contending with him, saying, 'You went into uncircumcised men and ate with them?' But Peter began and set it forth in order, saying, 'I was in the city of Joppa praying, and in a trance I saw a vision, a certain vessel descending like a great sheet, let down from the heaven by four corners, and it came to me.'" Now we know that took place at the 6th hour, and that was at noon. Verse 6. "Having looked into it, I perceived I saw a four-footed beast of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping creatures, and the birds of heaven. And I heard a voice saying to me, 'Rise up, Peter, slay and eat.' But I said, 'Not at all, Master, because whatever is common or unclean has never entered into my mouth.' And the voice answered me again from the heaven, 'What Elohim has cleansed, you do not consider common.' And this took place 3 times. And all were drawn up again into the heaven. And see, immediately 3 men stood before the house where I was, having been sent to me from Caesarea or Caesarea." So just in these opening remarks, we see quite a lot. We see that the apostles in Judah heard, but they weren't rejoicing with him by far. And that was when Peter just calmly decided to set forth what took place. They actually were essentially chastising him. And like I shared, Peter methodically recounts what occurred. He set it forth in order. And we know from last week the importance of the like numbers, like the 6th hour, the 9th hour, and how you can connect those things in the Bible and get a bigger picture and see more connections. And we're going to review many of those, in addition to the quantity of threes that we've talked about periodically. But as we just read in verse 10 and 11, the meaning of the sheet coming down with the unclean animals was to connect, and the sheet coming down 3 times was to connect what Peter saw as unclean to be clean as the 3 men came to his door. That vision was to talk about the men coming to him as not being declared unclean or nor common, but to receive them. In essence, that was the meaning of the sheet being lowered 3 times. So Peter tells of his vision knowing that it was successful for him to understand things. So he's feeling that if he just recounts the story, his brothers in Judah will get the message as well. Now, before we go further, I know last week I did not go into great detail about a Roman legion, but I think it's important. And so let me just review that. A Roman legion was the largest unit of the Roman army, evolving from 3,000 men in early times to over 5,200 men in imperial times, consisting of centuries as the basic unit. Now, from last week, we know Cornelius was a centurion. So if all these 10 cohorts make up 5,500 soldiers, then one cohort would be 500 soldiers. So there was probably about 5 centurions to each cohort, if you will. So that's the level that Cornelius was operating at. Now, later on, until the middle of the 1st century, 10 cohorts made up a Roman legion. This was later changed to 9 cohorts of standard size, with 6 centuries at 80 men each, and 1 cohort, the first cohort, of double strength. So it would be 5 double strength centuries with 160 men. So the formulation, how they were made up, varied somewhat, but that gives you an idea of what the role of a centurion was. The centurion could have been in charge from 80 to 100 soldiers, or sometimes even up to 160. But this, to be part of the Roman legion, was a very elite position, and the men tried out to even qualify, much like I shared last week as the NFL picks, if you will. And so it was a highly valued position, and it was made up of several cultures. And we learned last week that Cornelius was of the Italian regiment. So let's recall the connections we made with chapter 10 between Peter and Cornelius, and the Passion Week, which is also reviewed here in chapter 11, as we will continue to let Peter share the story of what happened in Caesarea to the men in Judah. The connection of the 6th hour, the noontime hour, when Peter prays on top of the roof, and it's recorded the 6th hour also was the beginning of darkness at the time of the crucifixion. So if we connect like numbers and like hours, if you will, it connects us back to the crucifixion. The connection of the 9th hour, 3 p.m., that was when Cornelius was praying and the messenger appeared. And Cornelius was not only praying, he was fasting. And it said in the 9th hour is also correlated to the ending of the darkness at the time of crucifixion. So that's interesting that the 6th hour and the 9th hour are used closely together in this story, as well as the crucifixion story. The connection we made also between Peter's presence during the Passion Week, because we know he was there, and we know that he denied Yahusha 3 times. Now, we also know there was a connection by the participation and presence of the centurion and soldiers that were given the gruesome task of crucifying Yahusha, and ultimately coming to the conclusion when they stood at the base of the crucifixion timber that truly this was the Son of Elohim. Now, that's a powerful statement, and that was coming from soldiers and a centurion. Whether there were more than one centurion, I couldn't tell you, but they were intimately involved in the gruesome task of crucifying Yahusha, and then at the very end realizing whom they had just crucified. And that was a huge deal for the soldiers. Maybe not for all of them, but definitely for some of them. So, and we know that that word had to have traveled quickly. We also looked at the connection between the threes. We know the sheet lowered 3 times. We know that 3 men were sent to Joppa to get Peter to come back to meet with Cornelius. We know also, like I shared earlier, that Peter denied Yahusha 3 times during the Passion Week when he was taken captive. Yahusha was taken captive. And we know the connection between Yahusha saying it is finished, because when he said it was finished, he not only died for the Jews, but he died for Gentiles as well. And it's interesting that we have the connection of Peter from the Jewish perspective, having the sheet come down at the 6th hour. And then we also have Cornelius, a Gentile, praying at the 9th hour. So in essence, it seemed like they covered that time period from Jew to Gentile, the 3 hours of darkness. Now, what was taking place in the spiritual realm during those 3 hours of darkness? Probably all kinds of things that we are not even aware of. But remember, he died for the Jews and the Gentiles. So connecting it to the story in Acts gives us that same dual picture. We know that guilt can play a major role, and we know that Peter felt very guilty after denying Yahusha. But also, guilt can drive a person to a closer relationship with Yahusha, for we know that those that are forgiven much love much, and we wonder if that was the same thing Cornelius was feeling. Do we know if Cornelius was there at the time of the crucifixion, maybe as a soldier in training? Who knows? But we do know that this was the greatest event on earth. We do know that it was an earthquake. We do know that there was 3 hours of darkness. Get your head wrapped around that, because that's not a normal eclipse, as we studied last week. And this was at and it was at Passover, so the moon was full and on the opposite side of the earth. And so in order to have a double eclipse, to where the sun wouldn't give its light nor the moon, it had to be a third object. Or, like I shared, we could just say Yahweh decided it to be dark for 3 hours. That's true, but many times, and most of the time, Yahweh uses his natural creation to bring about his will. So could it be the guilt of the centurions and soldiers once they realized who they had just crucified, Yahusha, king and priest of the Melchizedek order and chief commanding officer? Do you think that that guilt could have driven many of them to turn to the very one that they said truly this was the son of Elohim. Did they all turn? Probably not. But those that have a heart and desire to know him, he reveals himself to them. So it was only after the fact did they actually understand who they had just crucified. And in essence, Yahusha is our chief commanding officer. And for a centurion, a soldier, to come against a commanding officer is devastating. It's lethal. And so they took it very seriously. So in addition to those, let's continue. The seismic activity covering approximately 65 years around the crucifixion, they were significant. We went into some of those last week. And like I shared, the 3 hours of darkness over the land was unheard of happening, coupled with the earthquake and the very rocks crying out as to whom they had just crucified. And we know all creation proclaimed him. We know the temple curtain was ripped from the top to the bottom as well. And we know when Yahusha rode in on the donkey in the Passion Week, how the people were praising him and saying, Hosanna in the highest. And the Jewish leaders said, do you hear what they say? And he responded to the Jewish leaders saying, if they didn't praise me, even the rocks would cry out. Well, at this time when Yahusha hung on the tree, there wasn't praise going on, but the rocks ultimately did cry out. The major role the Roman centurion and soldiers played in the Passion Week is tremendous. And if you overlook that, that's a big portion of what was taking place. You have to look at the Roman centurions and the soldiers and what they were faced with, and the situations they found themselves in were phenomenal, and they were supernatural, and what happened many times they couldn't even explain. And that kind of information had to be going through the chains of human connections through all the land and the area, discussing what had happened. Now, was there some PR attempts to squelch that kind of communication? Sure, the Sanhedrin were all about trying to squelch the information, change the story, but there were eyewitnesses, and this was a major event, and word did get out. Also, the possibility that, like I shared, even Cornelius may have been present, but maybe at that time, maybe a soldier, not a centurion. And the tenure for that role as a soldier was usually 25 years. And when we read about Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, it had only been approximately 9 years since Yahusha was crucified. Now, this was, like I shared, the greatest event on earth, so surely there had to have been some communication among the centurions, the soldiers, throughout the land, including Cornelius hearing of it if he wasn't there, as well as others. And then the very fact, we cannot forget that the soldiers proclaimed at the foot of the crucifixion tree, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. That was proclaimed then, and to this very day, we know that the soldiers proclaimed that. And then the guarding of the tomb and the rolled away stone under watch of the Roman soldiers and their questioning had to have been communicated to others. I mean, after all, they were to guard that tomb, and the next thing they know, they wake up, the stone has been rolled away or rocked away by another earthquake or aftershock, who knows. But the tomb was open and Yahusha wasn't there. And as soldiers on guard, trying to communicate what happened, was a major task, and they were in essence told to say they had fallen asleep and that his followers came and stole his body, to which this very day many of them also state that was the case, but we know otherwise. The stone wasn't moved so Yahusha could get out. The stone was moved so men could get in to see that Yahusha had risen on the third day. So also last week, someone had mentioned, don't forget, who was the amazing centurion of faith in Matthew 8, verses 5 through 13, who sought Yahusha for his gravely ill servant. And he had sent someone to see if Yahusha would come to his home, and then he kind of had second thoughts about it and started going toward where Yahusha was himself, feeling he wasn't worthy to have him come under his roof. So he encounters Yahusha, and he told him that in essence. And he said, if you just say the word, my servant will be healed, because I am a soldier and I tell this one to do that and he does it, and I tell this one to go there and he does it. All you have to do is say the word. And that was when Yahusha, in essence or in paraphrase, said he had never seen such faith, and his servant was healed. So we don't know who this centurion was, but again, look at these important encounters that were important enough to be recorded in Scripture so that we would read them to this day and ponder them and search them out and find these pearls of great wisdom and truth. And we know life pretty much rocked on with the continued leadership of the Sanhedrin. There was a major power struggle here. Again, Yahusha turned everything upside down. There was a shift of priesthood here. There was a shift of the change of the law. Yahusha gave us the new covenant, a new blood ratified covenant that connected us back to the original marriage ketuvah in Exodus 19:5 through Exodus 24:11. That was broken at the time of the sin of the golden calf. So now, once again, Yahusha, with his own precious blood, has made another blood ratified covenant with us and has proposed to us. And all that is needed is that you accept his proposal and you receive him as your Lord and Savior, and know that he died for your sins, was buried, and arose the third day. And he shed his blood in your place, in our place, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And then he provided the covenant confirming meal by us remembering the bread as his body and the wine as his blood. And by doing so, we enter into that blood ratified covenant, and we become his priest of the Melchizedek order, of every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. Only under the Melchizedek order could that ever be done. Again, as I've shared many times, that could have never been achieved under the Levitical priestly order. We're now a kingdom of priests, but as before, the book of the law was imposed and the Levitical priesthood was assigned to carry that out, and the people lived with a kingdom with a high priest. They were not a kingdom of priests, which was the original plan A, under the blood ratified covenant. The book of the law was imposed. They had no choice. Actually, Yahweh was ready to wipe them out, but Moses intervened, and because he intervened, Yahweh gave them the book of the law that was implemented by the Levitical priesthood until the time of Yeshua or Yahusha. So that was the power struggle here. This was the friction. It was for power. It was for the priesthood. It was for the land. And everything that was in place was turned on its head. And Yahusha was and is our high priest. But even though it may have seemed like the Sanhedrin had, let's say, taken care of their problem, they were very much deceived, because the prophetic payday of destruction comes like clockwork in 68 and 70 AD, and they actually reaped what they sowed. And also, not only them, but the Herods, and we'll look at the Herodian dynasty here shortly. Proverbs 25:2, it is the esteem of Elohim to hide a matter, and the esteem of sovereigns to search out a matter, as to like the cause of the 3 hours of darkness. You know, to really search and study that out, what could have caused that. Or to search out, you know, the numbers, when you see like numbers like 3 times or 3 days, or when certain things occur on the feast day, to connect previous encounters of what occurred on certain feast days and the location that they referred to in Scripture. All of these things help you search out and find those pearls of wisdom. Also, to interpret, many times people interpret the sheet coming down with the unclean animals as meaning that it's related to food. You can eat anything you want. Don't say that you can't eat these things, because Yahweh said, don't call things unclean that I've said are clean. And that's missing the mark totally of the interpretation of that scripture. Even if you just connect the 3 times the sheet was lowered to the 3 men arriving at the same time, there's your connection. It wasn't about food. So to interpret the clean and unclean as in connection to food and not mankind as to what Yahushua declared clean is, in my opinion, a gross misinterpretation, and one that surely Satan would rejoice over. Also, keep in mind, if Antiochus Epiphanes set up Zeus and desecrated the temple with sacrificing pigs, do we as his temple desecrate our bodies when eating such things as pigs? I mean, just ponder that. You know, pigs eat anything. They eat garbage. And I don't care what people say as far as, oh, they taste good. That has nothing to do with it. The old cliche, you are what you eat, says it all. And he gave us his dietary guidelines as so we wouldn't be receiving the diseases of the Egyptians that ate such foods as those. So anyway, again, the other cliche is you reap what you sow. And he's trying to give us guidelines to protect us, not to harm us. We knew also that Cornelius, as a centurion, would take the command to spread the gospel covenant message very seriously, because soldiers follow commands to the T. Keep in mind, Cornelius believed in Yahweh. We know he was very devout. He gave alms. He was charitable. He was well respected by the Jewish population, but he had not been presented the gospel message, nor had he and his family and friends been born again and immersed. And that was the whole reason why his prayers were answered, and he sent for Peter when he was in Joppa. We looked at how the enemy is a chameleon that usurps identities, and by doing so steals, kills, and destroys, because that's the enemy's MO. He steals cultural identities, those that say they are Jews and are not, or those that say they are believers and are not, or those that say they are loyal and they are not. We see that in governments, we see that in ministries, we see that in gender roles. You know, they're even trying to steal children's identity of their gender. That's from Satan himself. So the attack is ever present to this day, attacking men, women, children, family units, attacking covenant marriages, changing times and laws. It's all around us. But that is why he's told us to be set apart. And Cornelius ruled his family, household servants, and his soldiers very well. He was known for his uncommon faith and was well respected by the community and the Jewish community. Now, these were some things that we had gone over in our live study, and if you want to read through those things that occurred that were recorded in some of these books, you can. I do not promote at all the Talmud, but it was some interesting insights and recordings that both the Jerusalem Talmud recorded and the Babylonian Talmud recorded as to Yahushua was really who he said he was. And just for us to look at Proverbs 25:2 a little bit more deeply, when it says, "It is the glory of Yahweh to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter," this has been understood as referring to the revelation of Yahweh's will in his word, where there are many times concealed in parables, allegories, metaphors, similitudes, etc. And it is becoming the majesty of Yahweh so to publish his will that it must be seriously studied to be understood, in order that the truth may be more prized when it is discovered. And depending on your level of passion to search these things out, truly does show a person's heart. And if it be Yahweh's glory thus partially to conceal his purposes, it is the glory of a king to search and examine his word, that he may understand how by him kings reign and princes decree judgment. Prophecies are partially concealed, and we cannot fully know their meaning till their accomplishment, and then the glory of Yahweh's wisdom and providence will be more particularly evident when we see the event correspond so particularly and exactly with the prediction. And there were several things last week I brought out in Gil Broussard's work on Planet 7X, just seeing the exactness of timing of the events, the cause and effects, and the exact calculations that Gil discovered in scientific and biblical research. Matching those things up were truly amazing. And he did thorough research of Yahweh's word and connected those dots. And like I shared, you can see his work on Planet 7X YouTube channel. And also on my channel, we did some question and answer interviews with him, just a little chat with him, because we're all learning, and we're not prophets on a wall, we're watchmen on the wall, and we're just trying to search these things out and discover these truths. And in this commentary right here, he goes on to say, and this was out of Bible Hub, he goes, "On this subject I cannot withhold an extract of a letter sent to myself by a royal and learned personage, His Royal Highness the Duke of Sussex. As far as I have presumed to dive into and occupy myself with the sacred volumes, I feel satisfied of their divine origin and truth, and I am satisfied likewise that they contain more matter than anyone, and myself in particular, can ever aspire fully to understand. This belief, however, ought in no wise to slacken our diligence, or damp our ardor, or our zeal, in attempting a constant pursuit after the attainment of knowledge and truth. As we may flatter ourselves, although unable to reach the gate, we are still approaching nearer to its portals, which of itself is a great blessing. So we see dimly in the mirror now, but we are to continue to seek and search out truth. And one such truth that Gil Broussard matched up was what could have happened to create that 3 hours of darkness. And with it being a full moon here, it would have had to have been a large planet come through to block from the earth the sunlight, and also the sunlight be blocked off the moon, so it would be a double eclipse. So that was definitely searching out to find pearls of great wisdom. Now, along our timeline, just so we won't lose where we're at, we're studying today between AD 40 and AD 45. So we're studying a 5-year period here. And again, Paul is still not started his first journey. This we reviewed as the travels before his first missionary journey. And in this study, we are going to see James, the brother of John, is beheaded, and that takes place in Acts 12. And that James is not to be confused with James, who writes the book of James from Jerusalem, whom was the brother of Yahusha. And then next week, we'll look at the first missionary journey. So we continue in Acts 11. And the Spirit said to me to go with them, not doubting at all. And these 6 brothers also went with me, and we went into the man's house. And he told us how he had seen a messenger standing in his house, who said to him, Send men to Joppa and call for Simon, who is also called Peter, who shall speak to you words by which you shall be saved, you and all your house. And as I began to speak, the set-apart Spirit fell upon them as upon us at the beginning. And I remembered the word of the Master, how he said, John indeed immersed in water, but you shall be immersed in the set-apart Spirit. So if Elohim gave them the same gift as he gave us when we believed on the Master Yahushua HaMashiach, how was I able to withstand Elohim? And having heard this, they were silent and praised Elohim, saying, Then Elohim has indeed also given to the Gentiles repentance to life. And that was the right answer. And in many ways, they should have known that this would be occurring because it's recorded in Isaiah, for instance, in chapter 43, 3 through 5. It says, I pour my spirit on your seed and my blessing on your offspring, and they shall spring up among the grass like willows by streams of water. One says, I belong to Yahweh. Another calls himself by the name of Yaakov. Another writes with his hand unto Yahweh and names himself by the name of Israel. In Romans 9:20 through 26, it cross-references Isaiah 29:16. Shall that which is formed say to him who formed it, Why have you made me like this? Does not the potter have authority over the clay? And in Hosea, it's referenced, even when he called not only us of the Jews, but also of the nations. As he says in Hosea 2, I shall call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not my beloved. And it shall be in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living Elohim. And then Jeremiah recounts Ephraim lamenting, saying, You have chastised me, and I was chastised like an untrained calf. Turn me back, and I shall turn back for you, or Yahweh my Elohim. For after my turning back I repented, and after I was instructed I struck myself on the thigh. I was ashamed, even humiliated, for I bore the reproach of my youth. Is Ephraim a precious son to me, a child of delights? For though I spoke against him, I still remember him. That is why my affections were deeply moved for him. I have great compassion for him, declares Yahweh. And in Zechariah it's recorded, and I shall pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of favor and prayers, and they shall look on me whom they pierced. So more and more will realize who was pierced that day and know who he was, just like the soldiers. Truly, this was the Son of Elohim. And the story continues in Acts 11, verse 19. Then indeed, they who were scattered because of the pressure that arose over Stephen passed through to Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except the Jews only. But some of them were men from Cyprus and Cyrene, who, when they had come to Antioch, spoke to the Hellenists, bringing the good news, the Master Yahusha. And the hand of the Master was with them, and a great number, having believed, turned to the Master. And word of it came to the ears of the assembly in Jerusalem, and they sent out Barnabas to go as far as Antioch, that's Antioch, Syria, who, having come and seeing the favor of Elohim, was glad, and encouraged them all with purpose of heart to cleave to the Master, because he was a good man, and filled with the set-apart spirit, and with belief. And large numbers were added to the Master. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to seek Paul. And having found him, he brought him to Antioch. And it came to be that for an entire year they came together in the assembly and taught large numbers. And the taught ones were called Messianites, first in Antioch. And in those days prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. And one of them was named Agabus. In most translations his name is pronounced Agabus, stood up and indicated by the Spirit that there was going to be a great scarcity of food over all the world, which also took place under Claudius Caesar. So the taught ones, each according to his ability, decided to send relief to the brothers dwelling in Judah. This they also did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Paul. So keep in mind about the scarcity of food. If Planet 7X actually did pass through the at the time of the crucifixion, that coming into our solar system of that size of a planet causes a lot of seismic activity. It can cause droughts of extreme heat or extreme cold. It can cause flooding. It can cause shifting and movement of even islands. And so keep that in mind, because the lingering effects of that happen very possibly could have been related to the scarcity of food at that time. And up here we see that some of them were from Cyprus and Cyrene. And we know from this scripture that it was Simon of Cyrene that was compelled to bear Yahusha's stake. So even the names of locations are connecting us back to the crucifixion time. But the good news was being spread, and that was the important part. And in 1 Corinthians, if we cross-reference verse 20, it says, "Yet we proclaim Messiah impaled, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Messiah, the power of Elohim and the wisdom of Elohim." Once you know who he is. And also, verse 21 is cross-referenced to Isaiah 53. And we learned last week Isaiah 53 is the forbidden chapter. So when most Orthodox Judaism, when they have their Torah parshas, they'll skip the latter part of chapter 52 and all of chapter 53. And to me, there's your sign, and I would highly recommend they be read. And then verse 21 is cross-referenced to Acts 26, starting with verse 18, to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light, and the authority of Satan to Elohim, in order for them to receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are set apart by belief in me. So Yahushua came to shift that authority back to us, and now he's done that, and we are his kingdom of priests, and we can walk in his power and authority that he has commanded us to go and make disciples. So he's given us back the authority. Satan is a defeated foe. He is still powerful, and we still have to resist the devil, and he shall flee. We can still pray the blood covering of Yahushua over us and our families. We can still speak the word against the devil as Yahushua did for the 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. That's how we resist. And of course we stand in our full armor of Yahweh. And we, after we've done all we can to stand fully clothed, then we pray and praise him. And we are cloaked with his cloak of zeal, and we are covered in his light. And with that, we stand in his power and authority, because we have moved from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, and that light can never be extinguished. And in Acts 21:39, but Shaul, or Paul, replied, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. So I just wanted to share again that Paul was from Tarsus, and that is where Barnabas goes to seek Paul. And Paul went there, he was sent there from Jerusalem when his life was threatened. So as we retraced his pre-missionary journey steps, he goes from Jerusalem up to Tarsus, then into Antioch, and through Syria and the countryside, sharing the gospel message, as well as meeting up with Barnabas and teaching at Antioch for a year. And in Acts 21:10, now it says, and as we were staying many days, a certain prophet named, this is Agabus, came down from Judah. Now I wanted to share this scripture because Agabus shows up here. Agabus is the one that indicates to them that there was going to be a great scarcity of food over the world, okay? But also Agabus is going to show up again in Acts 21 when he came down from Judah, and having come to us, he took the girdle of Paul, bound his own hands and feet, and said, Thus says the set-apart Spirit, thus shall the Jews at Jerusalem bind the man who owns this girdle and deliver him into the hands of the nations. And so I just want you to remember the prophet Agabus, because we will be learning about him further. And this scarcity of food, there was a commentator that elaborated on that. Says probably here it means the dearth throughout all the world. Probably here means the land of Judea, though sometimes by this phrase the whole Roman Empire is intended. And in the former sense, the disciples appear to have understood it as the next verse informs us, for they determined to send relief to their brethren in Judea, which they could not have done had the famine been general. So it was probably going to be a local scarcity of food. It is well known from history that there were several famines in the reign of Claudius. Dion Cassius mentions a severe famine in the first and second year of the reign of Claudius, which was sorely felt in Rome itself. This famine, it is supposed, induced Claudius to build a port at Ostia for more regular supply of Rome with provisions. So it was severe. And just to know through the Julio-Claudian family tree where we're at right now, in that timeline, Caligula had been assassinated. He was emperor from 37 to 41 AD. And the time period we're studying right now, Tiberius Claudius Nero is in charge from 41 to 54. And eventually we'll see Nero from 54 to 68, and that's the time period when Paul is decapitated, beheaded. And so I just wanted to point some of those things out. Tiberius was the emperor during a portion of when Yahusha was here on earth, as well as Augustus. And if you're like me, there's so many Herods, it kind of made my head spin. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it is good just to kind of know what Herods we're talking about. And why are there so many Herods? Because the Herodian Tetrarchy was formed following the death of Herod the Great in 4 BCE, when his kingdom was divided between his sons Herod Archelaus as ethnarch, Herod Antipas, and Philip as tetrarchs in inheritance, while Herod's sister Salome shortly ruled a toparchy of Jamnia, Judea. The major section of the tetrarchy was transformed by Rome in 6 CE, abolishing the rule of Herod. So we had Herod the Great, and then it starts breaking down there. Now, Herod Antipas was the one that beheaded or decapitated John the Baptist, okay? And then Herod Agrippa is what we're studying today, and he was the one that beheaded James. And Herod the Great, in the days of Herod the King, this was Herod, improperly denominated the Great, the son of Antipater, an Idumean, so he was an Edomite. He reigned 37 years in Judea, reckoning from the time he was created king of that country by the Romans. Yahusha was born in the last year of his reign, and at this time the scepter had literally departed from Judah. We also know it was Herod Antipas that Yahusha was sent to in Jerusalem prior to his crucifixion, and this episode took place in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 7 through 15. So these are some of the characters and the roles they played. And then later on, as we get into Acts, we're going to hear about this Herod Agrippa, Bernice, and Drusilla. And this is just recapping the associations of the sons. And what is significant was in relation to Archelaus. When Herod the Great passed away, Augustus Caesar honored his will, but Augustus withheld from Archelaus the title of king, promising it to him if he governed that part virtuously. But in the very beginning of his reign, he massacred 3,000 Jews at once in the temple at the time of the Passover, because they called for justice upon the agents who performed the barbarities of his father's reign. That's a word. So, but the key thing to see here is that he massacred 3,000 Jews at once in the temple. When? At the time of the Passover. So that is showing absolutely no mercy. That is a vicious attack. And just to show all of us this time period of what they were dealing with, we see in 6 AD a famine struck Rome, Italy. In 7 AD, a great flood in the Valley of Thames in England. Many people and cattle drowned. In 9 AD, there was a great overflow of River Humber in England, flooding the country all around. And in the 43rd year of Augustus Caesar, a terrible famine struck Rome, Italy. Augustus sent away not only strangers, but also most of his servants out of the city. In 10 AD to 15 AD, general fruitlessness gave rise to famine and great mortality. 14 AD, there was a great overflow of River Severn in England, causing great damage. 15 AD, the Tiber River overflowed and did such serious damage that it was proposed in Roman Senate to diminish its waters by diverting some of the chief tributaries. In 29 AD, there was a great overflow of River Trent in England. 33 AD, there was a great overflow of River Dee in England, caused great damage at Chester. In 37 AD, there was an overflow of River Medway in England and many cattle drowned. 42, in Judea, the river was desolated by a famine. In 43 AD, a violent storm almost destroyed Emperor Claudius near the islands of the southern coast of France. He was almost shipwrecked twice, first off the Ligurian coast and then near Isle of Hyrus. The storms were caused by the penetrating cold winds known as the menstrual. 46 AD, in Syria, there was a great famine. 48 AD, the River Thames in England flooded and 10,000 drowned. The River Thames in England overflowed, and like I shared, 10,000 drowned, and there was much damage to property. 50 AD, there was a severe winter in England, and all rivers and lakes froze from November to April. And we ourselves here in North America are experiencing extreme cold weather. And what could be causing these shifts in our weather? And all these things can start to be signs, if you will, if we see and start to see more of a pattern and more of an impact on crops. So in 51 AD, a great famine in Greece. 52, a great famine struck Rome. 54, grievous famine struck England. 68, in England there was a volcanic eruption followed by an inundation of the sea, a tsunami. The Isle of Wight separated from Hampshire. Okay, we have a whole island there separating. Tacitus reports that an unprecedented drought took place in the year 70. There was no water in the north of Gaul, and the Rhine River in Germany was barely seaworthy because of the low water levels. 76 AD, a famine caused great scarcity in Ireland. 79 to 88 AD, there was a terrible period of suffering when the Roman world seemed to be shaken to its physical foundations. A devastating drought and famine swept over the Italian peninsula, and it is said that 10,000 citizens died in a single day at Rome during its height. So it was a lot of distress and suffering. Houses were filled with dead bodies and streets with funerals. In 80 AD, there was a great overflow of River Severn in England. Many people and again cattle drowned. So why do I say all of that? Is to connect us to yet the times ahead. I mean, we may be living in comfort without catastrophes around us. However, some have experienced some major catastrophes, as in the California fires, or places where they've had the major tsunamis or major hurricanes come in. But in Revelation 6 we read, I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. So that's major seismic activity. So sorry, my throat's so dry. And Revelation 11, we see at that very hour there was a severe earthquake, and a tenth of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to Yahweh of heaven. And it goes on to say the second woe has passed, the third woe is coming. So we see many woes coming in the future. In Revelation 16, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, "It is done." Then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. Listen to this. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since man has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. So it would, we should heed some of these prophetic warnings that are coming our way, and we should know that we're not guaranteed of tomorrow, and we should seek where our position is in our relationship with Yahweh, or is there even a relationship there? And if not, why? But it goes on to say in verse 20 again, every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found here. Let's go back to 19. The great city split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. Yahweh remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. From the sky, huge hailstones of 100 pounds each fell upon men. I do believe that's a huge hailstone of about 100 pounds each fell upon men. What could cause that? Yes, Yahweh can do all kinds of things, but also Planet 7X can drag that much trash along in its tail and cause the meteor showers, the hailstones, to occur. And they cursed Yahweh on account of the plague of hell, because the plague was so terrible. And in Acts 12 we read, and about that time Herod the sovereign put forth his hand to do evil to some from the assembly. And he killed James, a brother of John, with the sword. And seeing that it was pleasing to the Jews, he proceeded further to arrest Peter as well. And they were the days of unleavened bread. So if those were the days of unleavened bread, Passover actually had passed. So when he had seized him, he put him in prison and delivered him to the 4 squads of soldiers to watch over him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Now, some translations say Easter here, and many times people have said, well, that's wrong, it should be Passover. But if it was the days of unleavened bread here, then Passover very well could have probably been passed. And Herod, a pagan, was actually waiting for after Easter, his pagan holiday, of Ishtar. So different schools of thought there. So Peter was indeed kept in prison, but prayer was earnestly made to Elohim on his behalf by the assembly. Now, who was this James? We read about him in Matthew 20, when the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "Command that these 2 sons of mine might sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your reign." But Yahusha answering said, "You do not know what you ask." And he goes, "Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, and to be immersed with the immersion that I am immersed with?" They said to him, "We are able." And he said to them, Yahusha said to them, "You shall indeed drink my cup." And we see James right here drinking that cup. And the 4 squads of soldiers, quaternions of soldiers, that is 16 or 4 companies of 4 men each, who had the care of the prison, each company taking in turn one of the 4 watches of the night. And also, this wasn't the first time Peter was placed in prison. And actually, it wasn't the first time that actually Peter was rescued miraculously from prison, because in Acts 5:18 we read, "They arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. But during the night an angel of Yahweh opened the doors of the jail and brought them out." So that occurred in 5:18, and we're going to see a similar event take place here. Now this goes into explaining about the Easter. And this is one perspective, and this is a commentary point of view. So I know it will vary among different viewpoints, but let's just look at what he has to say. After the Passover, perhaps there never was a more unhappy, not to say absurd, translation than that in our text. But before I come to explain the word, it is necessary to observe that our term called Easter is not exactly the same with the Jewish Passover. Very good. That's an improvement. And it's really not a Jewish Passover. It's Yahweh's Passover. It's for his people. It's to think that the feast days are just for the Jews is incorrectly stated that way. The feast, the rehearsals, are Yahweh's feasts, and those are for us, his people. And the man-made traditions in this nation and other nations, those are for pagan traditions, man-made traditions. So believers should be following his feast days. And so when we gather from anywhere across the world, we are celebrating the same feast, doing things the same way. It's a beautiful picture, and that's how it was meant to be. Sadly, it wasn't taught that way. So he goes on to say, this festival is always held on the 14th day of the first vernal full moon, but the Easter of the Christians never till the next Sabbath after said full moon. And to avoid all conformity with the Jews in this matter, if the 14th day of the first vernal full moon happened on a Sabbath, then the festival of Easter is deferred till the Sabbath following. So that was just his point of view on that. But the main thing to take away is that this word here very well could have been referring to the man-made tradition of Easter, the pagan worship of Ishtar that Herod was waiting for it to pass from. And the time of Passover and unleavened bread followed by Easter, this feast connects us again to the crucifixion, though approximately 10 years later. So here James is being beheaded. Peter is placed in jail, and this is approximately 10 years, 9 to 10 years after the death of Yahusha, at the same time period. So again, we see this connection based on feast connecting us back to the crucifixion period, as well as when we read about the 3,000 people that were assassinated in the temple during a Passover. You know, these feasts, these events that have taken place tell a different story, in-depth story. And other connections was the fact that Peter's imprisonments, this wasn't Peter's first imprisonment, it wasn't his first angelic rescue. And so when Cornelius tells Peter about his encounter with the angel, if anyone can believe that, Peter can, because he had the angel of Yahweh rescue him prior to that event, so he gets it. He understands that. And he also had a vision on the roof. So, and the connection of the soldiers on guard. At the time of Peter's rescue from the prison, we know about the soldiers on guard of the tomb. Again, those connections are all over the place. And Peter's first rescue, again, what were the guards to think? And the same at Yahusha's tomb. So we had these three had similar deaths. John the Baptist was beheaded by one of the Herods. James was beheaded by a Herod, and Paul is eventually beheaded by Nero. And again, the 6th hour and the 9th hour connects us back to the time of the crucifixion, with the double eclipse of the sun and the moon. The moon would have been a full moon, and because of the tilt, that's how the sun can shine on the moon at this point. But with the third object passing through here, it would block the sun from the earth, and also it would block the sunlight from the full moon and make it dark, as well as the earth. So this would be blacked out from viewing it from earth, and the moon would be blacked out viewing it from earth, and the earth in general would be blacked out. And in Acts 12 it says, "And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison. And see, a messenger of Yahweh stood by, and a light shone in the building, and smiting the side of Peter, he raised him up, saying, 'Get up quickly!' And his chains fell off his hands. And the messenger said to him, 'Gird yourself and bind on your sandals.' And he did so. And he said to him, 'Put on your garment and follow me.' And coming out, he followed him, and knew not that what was done by the messenger was true, but thought he was seeing a vision. And when they had passed the first and the second guard post, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them by itself. And they went out and went down one street, and the messenger instantly withdrew from him. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, 'Now I truly know that Yahweh has sent his messenger and delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the Jews, the Jewish people, and from all the Jewish people were anticipating,' because very likely his fate could have been very similar to James at that point, but he was rescued by the messenger angel. And keep in mind, when he was sleeping between the soldiers, he was bound with 2 chains. 2 soldiers guarded his person, his right hand being bound to the left hand of one, and his left hand bound to the right hand of the other. This was the Roman method of guarding their prisoners, and appears to be what is intimated in the text. So you imagine the shock when those prisoners awakened and Peter wasn't there. I mean, that was truly a miracle of Yahweh. No way could that have been occurred any other way. And just the fact, I love how the messenger kind of kicks Peter in the side to wake him up. But he also felt it was important for Peter to gird himself and bind on his sandals and put on the garment. You know, that has spiritual warfare language in it. And you could look at it as priestly attire. But there was a reason why the messenger took the time to record that. We could search that out further, but I just wanted to bring that out. And just remember, when Yahusha was on the cross and the soldiers were throwing lots, casting lots for his single woven garment, the true reason why it was important that that garment wasn't torn was that that was his priestly robe. And like Caiaphas ripped his robe, and that actually disqualified Caiaphas for other reasons. However, if they would have ripped Yahusha's garment, his priestly robe, that would have disqualified him. So the mention of these garments and things, they have more meaning. And of course, we're skimming the surface right here. And then it spoke of all these different gates. It is supposed that ancient Jerusalem was surrounded by 3 walls. If so, then passing through the gates of these 3 walls successively is possibly what is meant by the expression in the text. The prison in which he was confined might have been that which was at the outer wall. The iron gate, this was in the innermost wall of the 3, and was strongly plated over with iron for the greater security. And so lastly, it was this iron gate that opened on its own accord, and the influence by the unseen power of the angel ordained by Yahweh to open that door, because Yahusha is the gate. He determines who goes in and who doesn't. And he has told us no one can come to the Father except through him. So finally we see in verses 12 through 19, and having realized this, he went to the house of Miriam, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many had gathered to pray. And when Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. And when she recognized Peter's voice, she did not open the gate because of her joy, but ran in and reported that Peter stood before the gate. And they said to her, "You are mad!" But she kept insisting that it was so. And they said, "It is his messenger." And Peter continued knocking, and having opened, they saw him and were amazed. So on the 3rd time, they realized, okay, there's still a knock there, let's go see. And it was Peter. And motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he told them how the master brought him out of the prison. And he said, "Report this to James and to the brothers." And he left and went to another place. And this James was the brother of Yahusha. Now, when the day came, there was no small stir, I wouldn't think so, among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. And when Herod had searched for him and did not find him, he examined the guards and ordered them to be led away. And he went down from Judah, Peter went down from Judah to Caesarea and stayed there. So it's really a very sad story. Because when he had weighed everything and was fully satisfied of the divine interposition, he went to the house of Mary and the mother of John Mark, the author of the gospel, where it appears many were gathered together making prayer and supplication, and probably for Peter's release. So he went there to share what had happened. And we know Rhoda was a female slave or servant. She was a bondmaid. So maybe that's why maybe they did not take her serious at first. And also the fact that commanded that they should be put to death. That's what Herod decided. he believed or pretended to believe that the escape of Peter was owing, and he really didn't escape, he was rescued, was owing to the negligence of the keepers. Jailers, watchmen, etc. ordinarily suffered the same kind of punishment which should have been inflicted on the prisoner who escaped. They were supposed to have favored. So, what happened to the soldiers? Were they beheaded because possibly that would have been Peter's demise if he had not been rescued? I don't know. But that's the punishment usually matched what was in store for the prisoner. So that was very sad. And, the guards were innocent. So, also we read here that Peter eventually goes from Judah to Caesarea, and just recall in Acts 21:8, that's the same place that Paul goes, and that's where Philip lived, the evangelist. He was one of the 7 that became servants to the widows and that sort of thing, along with Stephen. So we know that Philip lived there, and we also know that Cornelius lived there, and other taught ones lived there. So that's probably why he headed in that direction. And we saw the faith of Rhoda, knowing that that was Peter. That reminded me of the faith of Cornelius. And lastly, we wrap up Acts 12, reading that now Herod had been highly displeased with the people of Zor and Sidon, but with one mind they came to him, and having made Blastus, the sovereign's eunuch, their friend, they were asking for peace because their country was supplied with food by the sovereign's country. So there was a lot of devastation and scarcity of food at that time, so they were trying to get in his good graces. And on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal clothes, sat on his throne and gave an address to them, and the people kept shouting, "The voice of a mighty one, and not of a man." And instantly a messenger of Yahweh smote him, because he did not give the esteem to Elohim, and becoming worm-eaten he died. And the word of Elohim went on growing and spreading. Yeah, they couldn't extinguish it. Praise Yahweh. To this day, they cannot extinguish it. And Barnabas and Paul returned from Jerusalem, having completed the service and having taken with them John, who was also called Mark, or John Mark. And so, of course, this Herod was the one that had decapitated James, one of the sons of Zebedee. And in Acts 12:21, we are reminded that upon a set day, Herod, arrayed in the royal apparel, sat upon his throne. In this commentary, it goes on to say he went down to Caesarea and there exhibited shows and games in honor of Claudius and made vows for his health. On the second day of these shows, he put on a garment made wholly of silver and a contexture most truly wonderful, and came into the theater early in the morning, at which time the silver of the garment, being illuminated by the first reflection of the sun's rays, shone out after a surprising manner, and was so resplendent as to spread a horror over those who looked intently upon him. And presently his flatteries cried out, one from one place and another from another, "He is God." And they added, "Be thou merciful to us, for although we have hitherto reverenced thee only as a man, shall we henceforth own thee as superior to mortal nature." Nor did the king rebuke them, nor reject their impious flattery, but looking up he saw an owl on a certain rope over his head, and immediately conceived that this bird was to him a messenger of ill tidings, and he fell into the deepest sorrow. A severe pain arose in his bowels, and he died after 5 days' severe illness. So seeing the owl, which is a nighttime bird, appear in the daytime, Herod was correct in thinking that was a bad omen. And I thought it was interesting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I thought it was interesting that Herod the Great, when he died, a frightful inward burning consumed him, and the stench of his sickness was such that his attendants could not stay near him. So horrible was his condition that he even endeavored to end it by suicide. So there were repercussions to the acts of the Herods as well as to the acts of the Sanhedrin. And then when we read when Joseph is told to take the young child and his mother back to the land of Israel once they were in Egypt, this is coming back into Israel, it says, and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Israel. Israel originally meant all Palestine, but during the period of the kingdom of the 10 tribes, it was restricted to their portion of the country. After the captivities and the return of Judah from Babylon, the phrase resumed its original meaning, and hence it is here used to include all Palestine, as Yahushua was not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It was fitting that he returned thither from Egypt. And then lastly, when we look at all that Yahushua was able to be more than a conqueror, when his enemies, even his enemies die, but he lives on. How innumerable this host of opposers, persecutors, oppressors, infidels, critics, literatures, organizations, principalities, and powers, a vast and motley array of forces, have sought the life of Yahushua, have made a great noise in the world, and died away in silence. They have died away in silence. Pharaohs, Neros, Diocletians, many a Charles, Torquemada, and Bloody Mary have come up and gone down, but the King of Israel, lives on, that sought the young child's life, and he arose and took the young child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. So his story is unstoppable, and the flame has ignited and cannot be quenched. And Yahushua is our Cohen Hagendal according to the order of Melchizedek. Praise Yahweh. He is our king and priest forever and ever. According to Psalm 110:4, by an oath Yahweh has sworn and does not relent. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And then 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And Revelation 5:9, and they sang a renewed song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain and have redeemed us to Elohim by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and made us sovereigns and priests to our Elohim, and we shall reign upon the earth. So that was the awesome story behind chapter 11 and 12. And Acts is just full of information for us to glean. And next week we will look at the first missionary journey of Paul in Acts 13 and 14, and we will just go on that journey, so we will not be confused and get these journeys mixed up. By the time you finish studying this with me and us together breaking bread, we're going to have these journeys down pat. So thanks for joining me. I always pray before I start. And I pray blessings upon you as I leave. May his face shine upon you. Until next time, be well. Take care. Bye-bye.